there's a silent risk and a countdown for an additional factor that could affect inflation and even supply chains, and that is kind of an obscure law in California called AB5 that may actually put a halt on trucking in and out of the ports in California. Remember, the ports in California, Long Beach being the one of the largest ones in the country, supply a great deal of cargo and products to the entire country. It's the closest port to China, where many goods come from and manufactured goods come from. And those containers that come off the trucks or come off the boats have to be shipped by truck either to rail lines or to distribution hubs. The truckers that do this many times are independent contractors. They're owner operators. They own their own truck. They work for a company, even companies that you see every day driving down the street, J.B. Hunt, Swift, all the major trucking companies. A lot of those companies use owner operators. Even though the truck says Swift, it may be that the tractor is owned by the driver and leased to the trucking company, and they pay him, kind of as an outside contractor. Well, in California, they've passed laws which severely limit your ability to hire outside contractors. They make the company consider you to be an employee, not a contractor. If you're considered an employee, the rules change. You have to have certain benefits. You have to have lunch breaks. You have to have many types of benefits that, quite frankly, are not built into the rates that are charged by trucking companies to ship freight from the Port of Long Beach to wherever it's going next, to the terminal or to an outside distribution hub. The law as applied to trucking companies was presumed to not be applicable, and the trucking industry figured this is not going to go anywhere, and they appealed it to the Supreme Court. Well, Supreme Court in California denied hearing the case. They won't hear the appeal, which means that very, very soon this law will be applied to the trucking industry, which means a lot of them won't be able to ship the goods the same way they did before. What's the result? Well, the injunction that has been in place for 2 years. This law was passed 2 years ago, but there was an injunction against applying it to trucking companies will be lifted, and complying with AB5 will be a reality for trucking companies in California very, very quickly. Gasoline has been poured on the fire as a supply chain issue, according to the trucking industry representative. Direct impact to California's 70,000 owner-operators who will have 7 days to cease long-standing independent businesses. So if you have an independent business, Joe's Trucking, you can't do that anymore. You have to be an employee of the company, meaning that you have to abide by their schedule, their work rules, and that of the state of California. And here's what that means. That the worker is not free from direct control and direction of the company, meaning that they're going to have to direct you times, schedules, that kind of thing. And the work that you do has to be under their control. The problem is many truckers don't want that. Even if you make the drivers employees, it's not very likely, because most drivers don't want to be employees. They want to be contractors. They own their trucks. They have their own business, and they can't operate as employees. Another option is to pivot being a logistics company and use small motor carriers to deliver the goods. The problem is that might run into the same AB5 issue. Look, this is not exclusive to the trucking industry. Even Alaska Airlines might close crew bases because the depot that they have for flight attendants and pilots are technically under the rules of California, and they have to have certain meal breaks, 30 minutes for the first 8 hours, and another 30 minutes, and sometimes that doesn't match up with airline schedules. So Alaska Airlines is just going to close the crew bases in California. That might have an effect on the amount of Alaska Airlines flights that go into California, but that's besides the point. In the trucking industry, yeah, it'll affect the drivers and the trucking companies, but in reality, it's going to create more chaos in the supply chain problems that already exist in the U.S. More importantly, the shipments that do happen are going to have a higher cost. And of course, anything that increases a cost factor in the shipping and freight side of the equation is going to end up being baked in and factored into the final cost of that product, that goods or service. So if the cost of a lawn chair at Walmart is $20 and the cost for trucking goes up for a couple dollars for that lawn chair, now you have a 10% inflation factor. And more importantly, there may be delays in getting some of these products out of the port. There's already a backup of we've seen of these ships. We haven't heard much about it lately, but it's still there. This AB5, even though it's one state, it's a state that has a stranglehold on shipping because a lot of the freight and cargo that comes into the U.S. comes through Long Beach or comes through the California ports. Can it be diverted? Well, there's no major ports. You can go to Port Elizabeth in New Jersey, Savannah, Jacksonville on the East Coast, but that's farther away from Asia. There are a couple other ports in California, but that would be subject to the same rules. Then you have to go up to the East Coast. Portland, has a pretty decent port, but they don't have the logistics coming in and out of Portland like they do in Long Beach. Of course, you have Seattle, Puget Sound, a little bit smaller facility, good logistics, but it's harder to get trucks out of the Seattle area. There's been some talk about upgrading some of the ports in Oregon. Coos Bay has a big development happening that could end up putting more cargo through Coos Bay, but that's going to be a 5 or 6 year process to get that ramped up. What are your thoughts on this? Are you a trucker? Do you see this happening? Are you an owner-operator? Are you a warehouse operator that sees some of the delays happening already because you can't get cargo and freight into your facility because there's a limit and a delay on the trucking side?